No theme song. Greetings, dear listeners, friends, if I may be so bold, and may I welcome you to our first bonus episode. So here's the deal. Here at Band Media Podcast, we got some decent sized changes coming up, and I wanted to let you know what you could expect. But also, I didn't want to do a full episode without dropping any fun facts. This is an educational podcast after all. So after I hit you with the updates, I will have a mini episode on a surprise subject. Unless you read the episode title, then you know it's going to be about Chiller. Well, I guess we all know it's going to be about Chiller now. Anyway, traditionally, we have aimed for 2 episodes a month between 15 to 30 minutes long. Now, the new goal is 1 episode a month, but it will be half an hour to 45 minutes long. Still to be released on the first Tuesday of each month, and hopefully with some bonus episodes like this one that reach outside our normal format. Also, there's a Patreon now, so go check it out, and if you can throw a little bit of coin my way, I would appreciate it. Look, I've never made a secret out of the fact that I don't yet have what you would call a gigantic audience. That's why it really, really means the world to me that there are those of you out there who have begun to follow this little passion project of mine. I really do pour my heart into it, and to think that there are folks that tune in, well, anybody would be proud to call you friends. So thank you from the bottom of my heart, and I can't wait to plow forward on this new chapter of the show with you. All right, me, play that music.
Every day, the news brings more and more images of random violence, torture, and sexual aggression right into our living rooms. Violence and violent images permeate more and more aspects of our lives. And I think it's time to draw the line.
Thanks, Joe. I'm Ronnie Ersenbach, and this is the Band Media Podcast, where we will be talking about the art that crossed that line. Well, welcome to our first proper mini episode. As mentioned in that little preamble, you already know that the subject of this mini is Chiller. But what is a chiller exactly? Is it the 1985 made-for-TV movie by Wes Craven? Or the cable channel owned by NBC Universal? Perhaps the British anthology horror-themed TV show? Or an episode of The Annoying Orange that was a spoof of Michael Jackson's Thriller? Or is it in fact a Batman and Robin themed roller coaster at Six Flags? Or is it the device that uses refrigerant in a closed loop system to facilitate heat exchange from water, where the refrigerant is then pumped into a location where the waste heat is transferred to the atmosphere? No. And if I'm being completely honest, dear listeners, friends, if I may be so bold, your guessing was getting a little weird there towards the end. Though I do admit I would be decently proud of myself if I somehow managed to make a halfway decent episode about a refrigerator component. But, alas, that is not this episode. The chiller in question is in fact the 1986 arcade game brought to us by our good friends over at Exidy. That's right, Exidy, who you may remember from episode 2 of this very podcast as the creators of Death Race, the first video game to cause a controversy over violence. Fun fact, on that episode, I had mentioned that you could find one of the very rare Death Race arcade cabinets at the Musée Mécanique in San Francisco, California. Well, I am very pleased to say that I have found a second opportunity to play one of these very rare original cabinets at the wonderful Pinball Hall of Fame in Las Vegas, Nevada. One of the 2 Hall of Fames that you must visit next time you are in Vegas. The other, of course, being the Burlesque Hall of Fame. But if we are going to talk about Chiller, which I swear we are, we have to first start with a little game called Crossbow. Crossbow, released by Exidy in 1983, was a light gun game. You know, like Duck Hunt. Now, while light gun games had been around since the early 30s, Crossbow took it to another level. Not only was it the first game to use fully digitized sound, but it also came with a light gun that was modeled after a full-sized crossbow. The game itself was a D&D style adventure where characters would walk from the left side of the screen to the right And as the player, it was your job to shoot any objects that came in to attack them. The game would go on to have several different conversion kits. A conversion kit is basically like it sounds. After you bought an arcade cabinet, when it wasn't quite sucking in the quarters like it used to, you could buy a conversion kit. And without having to spend the money on a brand new cabinet, you could switch out the signage and some of the innards, and voila, new arcade. There were 5 conversion kits for Crossbow. And in a move that can only be labeled as totes adorbs, they all started with the letter C. Cheyenne, Combat, Crackshot, Clay Pigeon, and Chiller. See, I told you we'd get back around to it. Chiller was decidedly much darker than any of its Crossbow conversion kit counterparts. In Chiller, you no longer played the part of a protector of valiant adventurers on their quest to destroy the Master of Darkness. Did I mention the final boss in Crossbow is named the Master of Darkness? Well, he is. And bears a passing resemblance to Garrett Bobby Ferguson from the regular show. But this time, you play as a sadistic torturer and murderer of innocent human beings. And let me assure you, this game was not fucking around. The first level, aptly called the Torture Chamber, features 4 living victims, all strapped in, almost completely nude, to 4 different torture devices. I specify living victims not only because there are various dismembered body parts scattering the ground, and not 1, not 2, but 3 severed heads on a shelf on the wall. The way to beat the level is by killing all 4 of the victims. Now, admittedly, the graphics are primitive by today's standards, but don't let that fool you. It is a ghastly scene. And the crudeness of the technology actually gives it this strange vibe that feels like a small child witnessed a murder and is describing the scene through a crayon drawing. As for gameplay, it seems simple enough. Just shoot the victim and be done with it. But alas, shooting them only blows away large portions of their flesh, exposing their blood, guts, and skeleton underneath. Yes, even when you shoot them in the head. As it turns out, the only way to kill these victims is by shooting the torture devices to activate them. The second level is called the Rack Room. It has the same concept, but with new torture devices, including a clever little contraption that lowers a victim into what looks like a river of blood so that an alligator can pop out and devour the bottom half of him. Though, in the game's defense, it might have been a crocodile. The third level, called the Hallway, switches to a more traditional shoot the baddies game featuring a Scooby-Doo-esque hallway where various ghouls and ghosts and mummies scatter back and forth in and out of random doors. The violence is turned down for this level, with the exception of a flying vampire head that when you shoot it, its eye pops out and pours blood. The fourth and final level is the Graveyard, where the violence is turned back up, albeit not to the same level as the first 2 levels, and you continue to shoot ghoulies from the grave. Fun fact, I call dibs on the name Ghoulies from the Grave. I don't know what I'm going to use it for, but it's mine. The fourth level also brings nudity to the party by having a topless lady zombie pop up from the grave. In between levels, you are treated to a slot machine minigame for extra bonus points or even a shot at a free game. One of the major ways this game managed to avoid controversy, according to Steve Kent, author of The Ultimate History of Video Games, was that, quote, nobody would buy the damn thing, end quote. And where it actually managed to do okay financially was in what he referred to as third world countries, although I can't find any indication of which countries he may have been referring to specifically. Shockingly, the game did get ported over to the NES in 1990 by American Game Cartridges. Though unshockingly, this was an unlicensed port. Keep in mind that Nintendo had a stranglehold on the video game industry in the late 80s and early 90s through their cutthroat distribution method. It was all but illegal to make video games for the original Nintendo Entertainment System without their stamp of approval. A very family-friendly stamp of approval that harshly limited instances of sex or violence and completely banned religious imagery. The NES port did its best to keep up with the violence given its more limited technological capabilities. And though it isn't as extreme as the arcade, it is by far the most sick and twisted game ever to hit the system. Its unlicensed status not only gave it a cartridge that looked slightly different from the typical NES carts we know and love, but it ensured that not many were produced, as they would never see the inside of any mainstream store and were primarily sold at small indie shops and gaming conventions. This led to the game being decently rare these days. Not the rarest in the world, but certainly the rarest in my personal NES collection. And that brings us to the end of our first mini episode. I hope you enjoyed it. But oh yeah, one final fun fact. I'll miss you, friends. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next time on the Band Media Podcast. Oh, there goes that music again. We got a Patreon now, so if you want to directly support the show, please go check it out over at patreon.com/bandmediapodcast. Also, feel free to find us on all the socials, but TikTok is where I'm most active, at BandRonnie. Please like, comment, and share, but if you really want to help the podcast out, tell your friends about us. That way, we can all be friends. Well, that's enough of my rambling for now, but keep being wonderful, dear listeners. Adios.